Shout out to the Professor and Asper's Gaming for supporting me at level 3 or higher on Patreon. Hey everyone, I'm Albert Boris. Mario Kart Double Dash is probably one of the most famous and revered Mario Kart games in existence. Released all the way back in November 2003, this game has gone on to become a cult classic in the Mario Kart franchise, still holding a strong fan base and having a special place in millions of hearts, including mine. This is one of those games I always find myself coming back to. Mario Kart Double Dash was one of the first Mario games I ever came into contact with, and one of the games that got me into the Mario franchise the most, up there with Mario Party 9. First finding out about it on YouTube, and then subsequently playing stonks of it at a friend's house and loving it. It wasn't until many years after though that I actually got to own it, and I didn't have to dream about it at night. And it has since gone on to become one of my personal favorite Mario Kart games. And after recently watching a video from one of my biggest idols, Ferris Productions, where he ranked every single course from this game, I thought I wanted to do this too. So here it is. My ranking of every single track in Mario Kart Double Dash. I'll be honest, out of all the Mario Kart games out there, Double Dash probably has the most consistent selection of courses in the entire series. There are only 16 of them, but none of them are particularly bad or downright awful. All of them are charming in their own right, and while yes, some tracks do end up becoming worse than the others, on the whole, there's not a single track I wouldn't mind playing. So with all that being said, let's just get this ranking started. Opening up this list, I feel this is gonna be a choice that's both gonna be popular and controversial. Like I said, none of the tracks in this game are bad, surprisingly enough, however, there's still two courses which I would personally consider to be below average. You know, like D-tier. And the weakest of them is Baby Park. This one is iconic for every reason imaginable. It prides itself on its simplicity, as it's literally just an oval. There were ovular tracks in the past, but this one took it a step further because it's literally just that. No hazards, no off-road, literally nothing. And it's so short, but it was the first track in the series to have a different number of laps compared to the normal 3. In this case, it was 7. It's pretty bold to create a track like this. You'd think it's a race course set inside of an amusement park at first, with roller coasters and merry-go-rounds. Instead, that's just going on in the background. Or so we thought. Because this track is so small and cramped up, bananas are placed everywhere, and shells, especially Bowser shells, are flying all over the place. Anyone can become a victim. So even if you don't race on a physical roller coaster in this track, it still feels like riding on one. Ironically enough, this track does live up to its name, even if you never even step foot on the amusement park. Now I like this track, but it's a bit boring. Most of the fun with this track is within the first few playthroughs, when you're absolutely mind-boggled that they actually made a track like this and how it actually works. The chaos is fun, and it's arguably what makes this track so fun to begin with. But because it's so short, they had to make it 7 laps instead of 3, so that it wouldn't go by as quickly. But even though it's still one of the shortest tracks to complete in Mario Kart history, clocking in at just 1 minute and 20 seconds, it somehow feels the exact opposite. When there's no Bowser shells flying around, it's got literally nothing. Literally nothing. It can get pretty boring, especially when you have to circle it 7 times with no notable changes happening in between. Baby Park is a pretty conflicting track for me. A very basic concept, which is at best lifted by the game's crazy mechanics and items. Unironically, I can't say I'd rather play on this track than any other in the game, and so it will stay in last place on my ranking. Another track I'm personally not too fond of would be Sherbets Land. This is pretty unanimously agreed to be one of the most frustrating Mario Kart Double Dash courses, and I don't disagree at all. Let me ask you, what comes to mind when you think about this game? Some will say 2 people per kart, double item boxes, special items, but for me it's the controls. My goodness, are they slippery. Tilting the control stick in any direction will result in your kart going absolutely haywire, making a lot of the tracks more difficult than they'd normally be. So what happens when you take that and add additional ice physics? You get Sherbets Land. Whenever I played the All Cup Tour as a kid in order to 100% beat the game, I always dreaded having to play on this track because I knew I would lose on this one, due to the uncontrollable terrain, the skating Shy Guys which were in the way, or worst of all, the freezes which when hit on impact not only immobilized you, but could in the worst case scenario even change your kart's direction. It was an absolute travesty. Lately, when I've gotten better at this game, it's become slightly less of a problem, but even then I tend to find myself mildly irritated playing this track. The atmosphere is okay, adopting a slightly jolly holiday vibe, but even then I never really found myself enjoying it all that much. Luckily, those are the only two below average tracks in my opinion. Now the opening course, Luigi Circuit, was actually surprisingly good. Yeah, it's not often that the first course in a Mario Kart game is particularly interesting. Most of the time, we're just simple layouts set on some sunny overworld, without any notable aesthetics or gameplay features. Their main purpose is just to be a simple tutorial track. Now, ironically enough, Luigi Circuit does fill in on all of those boring remarks, including on having a rather basic figure 8 design, with one key exception however. These roads are interconnected with each other, so you can bump into drivers coming in from the opposite direction. This one change adds so many new elements when you can be a jerk and throw a shell at last place just because you can. And unlike in Baby Park, where that's technically also possible due to its length, Luigi Circuit also has a less mundane layout, with boost panels, a chain jump, and this one random alternate route. It's a bit astounding how much it succeeds at being a decent track, when it's literally just a figure 8. Really, if the setting was more unique than just a typical overworld circuit, it could have been even higher on this list. Like Mario Circuit. Yeah, it turns out Mario Kart Double Dash really knocked it out of the park with the circuit tracks, in contrast to most entries in the series. I was debating on whether I preferred this or Luigi Circuit, but in the end this is what I chose. Mario circuits are typically a little more difficult than the average opening circuit, and have a slightly more nature-based setting, and that couldn't be truer said for GCN's Mario Circuit. It's one of the more difficult Mario Circuit tracks in the series, with sharper turns than usual and more hazards. The ending section with all of the bumps can be especially frustrating. Aesthetically, this is also probably one of the Mario circuits that best capture the nature theme a lot of these tracks are known for, with all of the greenery and trees, and even the entire second half of the track being set on a dirt path. It also helps that the circuit music in Mario Kart Double Dash is one of my personal favorites, having a bit of a happy-go-lucky vibe to it, in contrast to some of the other circuit themes that feel more like you're just playing a regular racing game. This song simply feels a bit more Mario-ish. Overall, it's a really good Mario circuit. However, it's still a bit simple, and although it's got a difficult layout, it's not as unique as Luigi Circuit, so it's only slightly better thanks to everything else this track is going for. Okay, this is gonna be slightly controversial. In 12th place, we have Mushroom City. Okay guys, this is not a bad track. I was surprised I ended up putting it so low as well, because I remember always really liking it. But when I played it again for this video, yeah, it's not that amazing unfortunately. On one hand, the atmosphere is absolutely kingly. No other track, not even the city courses in Mario Kart Tour, captures the city feel as well as this one. Like, it's got everything, from traffic, the 90-degree sudden turns, the highways, and more. You can even pick which way to go at times, like in a real city, and couple in a relaxing tune and night setting, and you have one of the most immersive Mario Kart courses ever made. But to be completely honest, that doesn't make for the most fluid gameplay. A lot of this track just consists of long straightaways that seem to go on forever, no matter which path you pick. Navigating this track can also be a bit confusing at times. I remember when I first played this course, I had no idea where I was supposed to go, since the signs blended in with the track itself and every turn looked the same. It adds to the charm, but it does admittedly make it slightly frustrating at times, even nowadays when I know the route. Now remember, I don't dislike this course. Just because it's at 12th place, it doesn't degrade the quality of the track. In fact, even if it's pretty low, I'd still put it in B tier. But there is another similar track in this game later on this list, which does all of this much better. Moving on. Yoshis Circuit is, in my opinion, the best of the game's 3 circuit tracks, which admittedly isn't saying too much however, since they're all pretty decent and equal in quality. As far as circuit courses go, this has got to be one of the most difficult ones in the entire series. And that's not surprising, since when you look at an overview map of it, it's literally in the shape of a Yoshi, making it by default a lot twistier. It's a risky concept, but it works surprisingly well as a racetrack, and it's quite astonishing how they were able to use so many different assets to both give it the illusion of looking like a real Yoshi from above, but while racing, still like a regular course. It's a really fun track to drive around on and make sharp cuts, especially with it having 2 really neat shortcuts, one of which unfortunately hasn't seen a return since Mario Kart Double Dash. We will miss you, Tunnel. That said, I feel like Yoshi Circuit had some wasted potential. Sure, it's in the shape of Yoshi, but Couldn't we perhaps maybe have had a few more references and visual differences from the other circuit courses so that it actually felt like Yoshi? I mean, sure, you got the Yoshi copter flying around, but what if you could perhaps add some Yoshi exclusive enemies roaming around the track? Maybe an aesthetic that resembled the original Yoshi's Island game. Wait, we already have that now. But it's still a really fun track, just one with slightly missed potential. Okay, so if you thought Mushroom City only being at 12th place was a bold move, now prepare yourself to hear me gush about Dry Desert, which will open up the top 10 of this list. So, this is one of the most despised Mario Kart courses of all time, and I honestly don't understand why, because this track feels so alive, honestly. Deserts are a hostile environment, and this particular desert track probably gives the best impression of it. You've got intense tornadoes hurtling your way, a sinkhole with a piranha plant lurking on you, Pokies randomly becoming gates and spawning double item boxes, and who can forget the ever so dangerous music that keeps you on your toes. I know I'm probably alone in sharing this sentiment, but honestly, this is one of the Mario Kart Double Dash courses where I feel the most immersed into the environment I'm driving in. I mean, sure, it's not the most complex course ever, and sometimes I feel like it's slightly long, but it's a moderately difficult track that manages to include all of these hostile elements while still making it feel natural. And then there's their remake in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and to be honest, the fact that there's an oasis there is the least of its problems, since it took out almost everything that made this version feel so alive. If I had to give the original flag for something, however, I guess it's kind of visually uninteresting, like a bit basic, but really that's it. All in all, it's a really underrated course, which quite frankly deserves more love. Peach Beach is, in the shortest way I can summarize it, the most simple track ever with the most ambitious elements. Or well, there is another track in the game just like this that's even better, which we'll get to soon. On the surface, it's just a really pleasant track that gives you the feel of being on a relaxing summer vacation in a tropical land. Partly thanks to the music, but also because of all the sections that are really charming visually, whether it's the town, the beach, or even this little harbor. Then again, it is also directly based off of Super Mario Sunshine, only one of my absolutely favorite Mario games of all time, so it shouldn't be surprising that I feel the way I do. It's really relaxing, but they also crammed so many elements into the track that despite it being a simple layout, it feels surprisingly alive, just like with Dry Desert. Like, the beach section has these tides that will rise and sink, always forcing you to rethink which pathway is the best to take, which only becomes harder with the absolutely kingly cataquacks roaming around. And then the developers even added a bunch of useless stuff they totally didn't need to, but they did it, and it makes the track feel even more alive. Like, there's this pipe detour you can take, whose only purpose is awarding you a double item box. And even though it's way slower than the normal route, I always find myself taking it just because why not? And you can even circle around this fountain for no particular reason. This track is just really charming, and we're only getting better from now on. Now looking back, this version of Bowser's Castle isn't really the most ambitious one when you put it next to the 17 other Bowser Castles in the series. My goodness, this series of tracks is oversaturated. But on the other hand, it was definitely the most important one when it first came out. Mario Kart Double Dash was in many ways one of the most revolutionary installments in the series, and I mean that in more ways than just the update to the graphics. Sure, on one hand, a lot of its gimmicks were forgotten in future games, but some of them were not, like double item boxes, customizable vehicles, or even course archetypes. When you think of a Bowser Castle track, you probably imagine the dark and broody corridors, dangerous hazards blocking your path, lots of lava, and Bowser statues. Well, it all started with Mario Kart Double Dash's rendition of the track. In fact, Mario Kart Double Dash was even the first game where Bowser's Castle was exclusively the third track of the Special Cup. Sure, this version may not be as intense or difficult as some of its successors, but despite that, I feel like this one is one of the best atmospheres out of any Bowser Castle, with absolutely haunting music. It's more ominous than chaotic, which translates well with this track's rather easy design. You gotta give this track some respect for what it does with what little it has, and overall, it's a really good course and respectable Bowser Castle track. Out of the two highway courses in Mario Kart Double Dash, I think Mushroom Bridge is far superior to Mushroom City. Let's see how many people agree with that statement. I can totally understand why someone would prefer Mushroom City, since it's arguably more difficult and perfectly captures the feeling it's going for. But to be honest, Mushroom Bridge is in my opinion just a lot more well-rounded and well-designed for a Mario Kart track. Despite being a lot easier, shorter, and thematically more generic, it still manages to include more interesting gameplay elements. No other track in this game has as heavy emphasis on shortcuts or alternate routes as this one. We all know about the legendary bridge, which allows you to drive on the narrow railings of it with boost panels on it. It's super difficult to pull off and it's barely much faster, but it's still so fun trying to challenge yourself. And there's more to it than that, and I'm not just talking about that off-road cliff shortcuts. Just like with Peach Beach, there's a detour that leads to Warpipe which will give you a double item box, which again, it doesn't need to be there, but the fact that it's there just makes the track feel more interesting. And then you can also drive on the pavement besides the road on some sections, which is completely detrimental to winning. Why is it there? I don't know, but it sure makes the track feel a bit more interesting to play compared to the more straightforward Mushroom City, which is still really good, but feels a bit less suited for a Mario Kart track. Moving on. Waluigi Stadium is an instant classic. It doesn't matter which version of the track you're talking about, it's always been amazing. I still remember playing this particular course for the first time when I got Mario Kart Wii over a decade ago. It felt absolutely magnificent. There were so many ramps to trick off of and do epic stunts from, and it felt amazing to do it in this dirt bike stadium, especially with all the cheers from the audience and the dazzling yet scary red sunset. And combined with some wacky elements like these dancing signs, I remember thinking this was the perfect ending course to Mario Kart Wii. Back when I didn't know there were unlockable cups beyond the Banana Cup. The Gamecube variant of this track is pretty much the same course. The main difference is that the trick system didn't really exist yet, so going off the ramps wasn't nearly as epic. The straightaway didn't even have the half pipes yet, but even without those changes, I still consider Waluigi Stadium to be a great track, because it still has everything else I mentioned. And in some ways, the straightaway is actually better without half pipes, since the difficulty is now avoiding all of the hazards that are constantly moving around. It's always been an epic track where you daringly navigated through a dangerous dirt bike arena, with a crowd cheering on you and filling you with determination. Like, if this was the final track for the game, I wouldn't entirely mind it, since it does kinda fit due to everything I mentioned, including the sunset representing the end. It is, simply put, a really great track, and from now on, we'll be getting to the really amazing courses on this ranking. So despite some of my controversial placements on this ranking, you can all relax knowing that I still put the biggest fan favorite from this game, DK Mountain, in the top 5.
How's it going, everyone? It's Ryder here.
Wait, hold up, who invited you? This is my ranking.
Albert, I am very disappointed that you're only putting DK Mountain at number 5. Seriously, it's time for me to give this track some justice. DK Mountain is simply put an amazing track. Anyone who's played it knows exactly why it's one of the most deservingly loved courses in not just Mario Kart Double Dash, but even the entire series. When you got shot out of the cannon and watched as the angry volcano came closer and closer, you knew you were in for a tough ride. It is a simple concept, getting flung up to the peak of a mountain, and then having to make your way down while avoiding boulders and doing sharp turns, but it is one that works so incredibly well. Partly thanks to the adventurous music, it is going to be an amazing track to see return to the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass.
Oh, well, I guess you just summed up my entire opinion on the track. Wait a minute, it's obviously gonna be Dino Jungle that returns.
Oh, really?
And speaking of which, as much as I like DK Mountain, I do slightly prefer its more underrated counterpart in the Special Cup, Dino Jungle. While DK Mountain is great and all, I think Dino Jungle is simply a more interesting track to play on. Yeah, DK Mountain, while an epic journey, doesn't really have much more going on than that. This track on the other hand is a bit more random in its concept, racing in a prehistoric jungle. It's a more difficult track than DK Mountain, as you have to avoid getting stomped by a dinosaur, making sure to not get hit by geysers, and drive on longer and even more narrow bridges. This section has 3 of them, and they're all way harder to not fall off of than the ones straight on in DK Mountain. Dino Jungle just feels like a more difficult and interesting take on the jungle setting seen in the former track, even featuring a really cool shortcut. And for these reasons, I've always found it to be slightly more interesting than DK Mountain, whose only real hazards are falling boulders. And I'm eagerly awaiting Dino Jungle's return in wave 5 or 6 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass.
You mean DK Mountain?
No, Dino Jungle! Come on, I predicted DS Mario Circuit, please let me continue my streak.
It's obviously gonna be DK Mountain.
Oh, come on, not my evil twin brother as well.
Didn't you notice how awkwardly scaled up it is in Mario Kart Tour? It's almost like they created it with the DLC in mind!
Let's just continue on with the top 3 of my ranking now. If there is anything I enjoy more than making YouTube videos for all of you, it would have to be one thing: traveling abroad, particularly by ferry. It's something I've almost always done every year since I was very young, and so it's become such an integral part of my childhood that any thought of cruise ferries makes my mind happy. Like when I played Daisy Cruiser. My, is it simply impossible to not feel joy when playing it. Take the summer vacation vibes I mentioned for Peach Beach, except now it's on a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, and it feels so much more unique. I love going through all of the different decks of the ship, whether it's the relaxing sun deck, avoiding the pool, dodging the tables that are constantly moving, to accidentally falling down to a basement. Yeah, this track goes all out on the luxury cruise theme, and it's pretty amazing how they were able to design a track around that. Mario Kart courses are usually at their best when it's an out-of-the-blue idea, and it shows in this track. They incorporated so many elements of such a charming setting, and the execution of it all is simply put, kingly. You know what? Forget N64 Rainbow Road for a second. Forget Wii Rainbow Road. In fact, even forget about 3DS Rainbow Road. Because Mario Kart Double Dash's take on this track deserves so much more attention than it's currently receiving. The Rainbow Roads are usually a heated topic, since they're usually the final track you play in any Mario Kart game. They tend to be three things: very difficult, very epic, and very beautiful. And Mario Kart Double Dash's version of Rainbow Road might just be one of the absolute best ones of all time. No other course has ever felt so beautiful, so final, and so epic all at the same time. It's probably got one of the absolutely best video game songs ever, perfectly representing these feelings, and it flows so perfectly with the track itself, being one of the most difficult Rainbow Roads out there. This is already perfect enough. But what honestly makes it even better is the fact that you're racing above a city rather than being in space. It really strengthens the feeling that you're on top of the world, you've climbed the ladder and finally reached the final level. It feels a bit like you're watching down on the adventures you've been through, and it's a truly beautiful track. I was debating on maybe putting this track in first place, because really there's nothing I can complain about. However, there is one track that ended up being slightly better. You guessed it, my favorite course in Mario Kart Double Dash is Wario Coliseum. Ever since I first stepped foot on this track, I knew it was something else compared to the other tracks. It's an interesting trend how Wario and Waluigi always get some of the coolest and wackiest tracks out there, and it totally fits in with their chaotic nature, and Wario's Coliseum is a perfect representation of these types of tracks. Take what I said about Waluigi Stadium, except pretty much everything is better. Now yeah, on one hand, Waluigi Stadium's gritty aesthetic had a bit more personality as opposed to Wario Coliseum's more clean cage-like aesthetic. In fact, the Coliseum aspect of the track is barely even relevant at all, it's just kind of in the background. However, to be honest, I actually kind of prefer the aesthetic in this track. It feels like you're inside of some crazy obstacle course, meant to act as a bit of a final challenge, with thousands of spectators watching you pull off some of the wildest jumps ever. And this concept is utilized to its full potential. It's the largest course in the series, and it does all sorts of crazy twists and jumps. Literally, sudden drops, gap jumps, loops, more gap jumps, you name it. In fact, it's even so long that it was the first and so far only Mario Kart course to have 2 laps. It really just brings home the feeling that this is a track unlike anything else. It's the start of a final challenge, and it will not hesitate to get everything at you, and that is why it's my personal favorite Mario Kart Double Dash course. And overall, that was my ranking of all of Mario Kart Double Dash's 16 courses. But what is your ranking of this game's tracks? If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel as I talk about everything Mario related.
Well, technically, it would be everything Mario Kart related. When was the last time you didn't do a video about it?
I mean, okay, fair enough.
And remember guys, predict DK Mountain for the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass.
Yeah, Albert, no one wants to see Dino Jungle.
Dude, didn't you already make a video about this topic?
Yeah, I did. Make sure to check it out. Who knows, maybe Albert Boris makes an appearance in one of my videos.
Yeah, now get out, both of you! And I'll see you all soon. Until next time.